Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Zoom Sutter seminar. Thank you for joining us. I would like to thank Alison Walton from the Immokalee IFAS Center for her help and cooperation. Today's program offers one CEU for pesticide license renewal and one CEU for certified crop advisor. If you need CEUs, email me your name, email address, and license number. Today's program will focus on managing aggressive weeds in citrus, long-term solutions, and practical application or approaches. Our guest speaker is Dr. Ramdas Kanissery, Associate Professor in Weed Science at the UF-IFAS Southwest Florida Research and Education Center in Immokalee. In general, weeds reduce soak, reduce crop yield, and decrease production cost. Weeds may harbor insect pests, mite, and plant diseases. Weeds compete with trees, particularly young trees, for water, nutrients, space, and even light in the case of climbing vines, which can easily cover trees. The more competitive the weeds, the more advisory they are. They alter tree physiology, growth, fruit yield, and fruit quality. Mowing before seed head formation is necessary to reduce seed dissemination and reinfestation. Weeds also have various effects on tree performance, including reduced efficacy of low-volume irrigation systems and interception of soil-applied pesticides and fertilizer. Frequent cultivation results in the destruction of citrus fibrous roots, which normally would grow in the undisturbed portion of the soil. Herbicide ban. If it's too wide, you are wasting your money, your time, and herbicide, and you are increasing soil erosion. Several herbicides, including glyphosate, have reduced effectiveness when mixed in hard water. This antagonism can be overcome by adding ammonium sulfate to the tank mix. The use of the same herbicide over and over again can result in pesticide resistance. The most effective means to prevent or delay herbicide resistance is to rotate herbicides with different mode of action. Poor weed control can be expected from post-emergence applications to weeds under stress conditions due to poor uptake and translocation of applied herbicides. Calibration, which is the process of measuring and adjusting equipment performance, is very important. Back to our guest speaker. Our guest speaker is Dr. Ramdas Kanissery, Associate Professor in Weed Science at the Southwest Florida Research and Education Center in Immokalee. The key to his effective weed management is to address the problem early enough before it spreads. His talk will cover research-based strategies for managing aggressive weeds, such as Spanish needles, Parthenium, day flower, Guinea grass, and Torpedo grass, helping growers maintain long-term control and protect the health and the productivity of their citrus trees. Dr. Kanissery, it's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Manji. Good morning, almost good afternoon. I hope you can hear me loud and clear. So thank you for the introduction and bringing up some important concepts or terms in the citrus weed management, Dr. Monji Sakri. So today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to touch base with a very important and timely, I believe, topic in the citrus weed management, managing aggressive or hard to control weeds in citrus production. So I'm going to share some solutions, effective and long-term solutions, as well as some practical approaches. So this is how I have organized or outlined my talk for today. So I'm going to talk about why some of these weeds are referred to as hard to control or aggressive, some key traits of them, then some solutions based on the research observations and things like that from our trials for their management. And finally, a few slides on some practical approaches that we often overlook or we should avoid so that we can manage them or address this type of weeds very effectively. So key traits of hard to control weeds. So before going deep into my talk, let me show in a single slide why weed management matters in citrus. So, I've been a weed scientist for about with UF for about 8+ years now, and I work in citrus since my start. So I have worked in other production systems as well before in row crops and things like that. But when it comes to citrus, I believe it is unique because the weed management, the focus is all about the tree, not the weeds, because we have a difficult situation right now, challenging situation right now, HLB or citrus greening, right? So weeds, so citrus is really not in a good competitive phase right now, and weeds can take over citrus very easily. So competition for resources is very important when you have a weed or weedy citrus grow. So whatever you do to boost your citrus should go to the citrus tree. It should not be going to the weeds, right? So resource competition is happening there in terms of nutrients, sunlight, water, and everything. And not only that, in the last few years, if you have followed my talks, I have shown some examples of how weeds can support psyllids or citrus greening vectors. So not only psyllids, generally weeds can support the pest and diseases in any crop production system. And recently, I'm not showing any data here, but I'm going to show that presence of weeds in the citrus tree rows can actually interfere with the root development in tree crops, right? Citrus. Okay, so it is very important. Again, one of the impact of HLB is reduction in the root development, and presence of weeds can actually further reduce or interfere with the root development. So that is another impact we are going to have with the presence of weeds. So the presence of weeds generally can be reflected in the yield as well, because we found that from our studies, weed interference can actually reduce citrus yield by over 25%, which is a big percentage when it comes to the status quo of the industry we have. So we have to harvest as much as whatever we can from this citrus growth. So weeds need to go. Really, we need to have a good weed management program. And right now, what we are dealing with is several aggressive weeds. And when I say aggressive, it is actually relative. Okay, maybe the weeds that is hard to control in my grow may not be a hard to control weed in your grow or in your locations. It depends on the production system, management style, as well as the location. But there can be once in a while we have to deal with this type of hard to control or aggressive weed. So what defines an aggressive weed? Why are they called a hard to control weed? So these are some of the things I have put together, some pointers I want to bring to the table. I will go through each one by one in the next few slides. So tolerance to herbicide programs is a key character of aggressive growth. For example, let me invite your attention to this photo here. So you can see here, we had a herbicide program, let's say glyphosate. The grasses are killed in the foreground, but in the background, you see this weed. This is a Parthenium, or sometimes known as ragweed, Parthenium, white top, whatever you call it. This is a very hard to control weed. no herb, I mean, especially when you have a herbicide program such as glyphosate, it didn't touch it. It's still green as healthy as before. It is staying there. So this type of weeds are inherently or naturally tolerant to some of the herbicide programs. For example, paraquat or herbicide, whatever you spray it, it's not going to touch it. Some other examples of weeds that are naturally tolerant to herbicide programs include horseweed, goatweed, and other weeds. Okay, so this type of tolerance is a problem that can create hard to control or aggressive weeds in your groves. Second point is deep or extensive root system. Okay, root is the root cause of all problems, right? So when you look at observe the roots of several weeds, let's say Spanish needles, for example, some of these weeds can run very or develop very deep root system. Spanish needles root can be up to 20 inches, which is not bad, provided the reduction in the root development in citrus we have with the greening. So these Spanish needles can suck up a lot of nutrients and moisture from about 20 inches. Okay. When it comes to horseweed, another problem weed, it can run at much more deeper roots up to 30 inches. And Guinea grass can run up to 40 inches. And there are other weeds that can run even deeper root systems. So this type of very deeper, extensive root system can help these weeds to thrive and compete with the citrus trees. So that also make them really, really aggressive. And on top of that, not only just deep, some of these weeds can actually develop extensive root networks. For instance, Johnson grass. I think Munji showed a picture of Johnson grass. I want to show its root system. It can develop a lot of extensive rhizomes, also known as underground roots. So if you pull up a grass and look at their roots, if you see this white colored extensive rhizome network, highly likely it's going to be a Johnson grass. And nutsedge, on the other hand, can also run a lot of rhizome network through tubers or nutlets and things like that. So this type of weeds, due to their extensive root network and deeper roots, can thrive in the growth and will be very difficult to manage them. So they are also considered as hard to control weeds. Okay, so root system is another thing. Another point I want to bring that can make a weed a really aggressive or hard to control is their reproductive capacity as well as adaptability. For example, I want to present a data here. This is the number of seeds produced per plant in several weed species. For example, let's see. We have Spanish needles, pigweed, Parthenium, horseweed, goosegrass, all these weeds, broadleaved and grass weeds that we see popularly or commonly in our citrus groves. Look at how much seeds that can produce per plant. For example, Spanish needles, they are like 2,000 to 3,000, but there are other weeds that can actually produce, for example, Parthenium can produce 50,000 seeds. Or if you look at pigweeds and things like that, they are more than 100,000. Pigweed, for instance, one plant can produce 200 to 300,000 seeds per plant. I'm not kidding. It's a cheap and dirty experiment I have done here. You put a pigweed in a pot, in a greenhouse, and see, all the baby seedlings are coming up. And one plant, this is not even a healthy looking pigweed, still it can produce a number of baby seedlings here. And not only that, of these 100,000 seeds, we found that about 80 to 90% of the seeds can actually germinate in the very next season, meaning they can actually add the seeds to the soil and make the seed a very enriched seed bank. Spanish needles, it's a big problem these days, and we are seeing the Spanish needle are getting tolerant to many herbicides program, especially in summer. What we are finding is Spanish needles, although they are not really big seed producers compared to pigweed, whatever seeds they are producing and adding to the seeds, 70 to 80% of that can germinate into the next season. So this type of weeds can become really aggressive and hard to control if you don't manage them in time, right? So based on these traits, I'm gonna list a few of these weeds as aggressive or hard to control weed in citrus production. For example, Spanish needle, we talked about that, Parthenium, goatweed, horseweed, then some of the grasses like Bermuda grass and Guinea grass. So Bermuda grass is one of those examples of the weed that escaped from an ornamental production system because it's considered as a lawn grass in many areas, and at some point of time it's gonna introduce into a tree production system, right? So that will become a weed. And Guinea grass, then dayflower, another issue, especially in our central Florida locations, we see a lot of dayflower encroachment. And nutsedge in Southwest Florida, nutsedge, not only in citrus, but even in vegetables, nutsedge is a big problem. We are throwing anything and everything at nutsedge to manage them. So again, the disclaimer here is this is not a complete list. There can be more weeds to this list. This depends on where you are at and what your management style is. But I'm going to talk about some of these weeds and how to manage them. So let's switch gears to the next topic in the presentation. We know why they are known as hard to control, what makes a weed hard to control. Now, what are some of the solutions that we can bring to the table to effectively manage them or address this problem? Okay, so these are some of the best practices to manage a hard to control weed in citrus growth. Generally, these are some of the practices that we should use to manage weeds in citrus, but when it comes to hard to control aggressive weeds, this will be really handy. So let's see one by one now. Herbicides. So there are different types of weed management strategies in our toolbox, right? There are cultural, there are preventive, there are mechanical, but this is chemical. So chemical weed control utilizing herbicide is by far the best, widely accepted and effective management when it comes to a perennial cropping system such as citrus. So we have done several studies to understand which is the best time to manage weeds in a production cycle, or in weed science term, it is known as the critical weed-free period. The time that we should make sure there is no interference from a weed, or there is no competition from a weed in that production cycle, okay? If you look at the citrus, let's say a production cycle runs from flowering to harvest, say. So in my observation, in our studies, we found that from flowering to the early fruit set time, that's a time we should make sure it is weed free, 100% weed free in the tree rows. At least we have to, that way, there is no competition for the trees from the weeds, and all the resources can be utilized for putting out the flowers as well as converting that flowers into fruits, and which that can be reflected in the yield as well. So, for example, if you think about one of our popular varieties such as Valencia, this is about that time. Late spring to early summer is the time we have to make sure the citrus tree rows are weed free. So we need to bring in a pre and a post emergent herbicide program, combination of them or integration of them to make sure we don't have a interference of weed in that time. For example, this is the time we can bring in some pre-emergence herbicides, make sure there is no germination happening, and as the weeds germinate as you needed, you can actually manage them with post-emergence services. I want to bring this picture into your mind when I talk through the next slides, because this is a general depiction of a weed management program we have in citrus from a production to production cycle, okay? So we have a number of herbicides in our toolbox. I don't want to go each and every one. We have an awesome production guide we have put together in UF-IFAS extension, and there's a chapter known as weeds, and it has all the herbicides available to use in citrus with all the restrictions, rates, and other usage pointers. So make sure you read that chapter if you haven't already. But these are some of the examples of non-selective herbicides we are available or we have approved for use in citrus, including carfentrazone, paraquat, glyphosate, glufosinate, ammonium. These are non-selective, meaning they are broad spectrum, can be utilized for both broadleaves and grasses. And if you have broadleaf pressure, for example, if you have Parthenium or Spanish needles, things like that, there are some specific broadleaf killer like saflufenacil or Trevix 240. We have a 24C local need label for embed extra that we received a couple of years back. So those are some of the tools in our arsenal. Then if you have a grass pressure like Johnson grass or Guinea grass, we have fluacethope as well as sethoxydim, some of the examples we have. So just give your big, rough picture in the mind. We have a broad spectrum as well as specific grass killers, post-emergence herbicides. Okay. Now coming to pre-emergence, again, we have a long list here depending on your choice or the weed pressure and things like that. You can utilize some of this. We have simazine, diuron, nolfurasone, pendimethalin, indaziflam, flumioxazine, and recently we have a couple of herbicides approved to use in citrus, including rimsulfuron. It's a nice, it's a good pre-emergence herbicides. With the name Matrix or proving some example trade names. They are great on broadleaf as well as grass post-emergence suppression. Flazosulfuron is another herbicide that we tried recently and found to be really effective. But one caveat here is this herbicide can only be applied in a mature tree, not in young trees. So those are some of the new additions that we have in our pre-emergence herbicide toolbox. And this will be updated again in the new Florida citrus production guide. Okay, so those are some of the herbicide, chemical weed control. We need to bring in that pre-emergence herbicide and post-emergence herbicide program, at least one pre-emergence herbicide. I'll tell you why towards the end of this presentation, but it is very important, and we need to maintain that critical weed-free period and follow up with as the weeds emerges. We need to follow up with the post-emergent cleanup. So another pointer I want to bring to the table when it comes to the best practices for addressing hard to control weeds is monitoring and early detection. This is a teeny tiny thing that we might overlook, but it can go a long way in managing or addressing this type, the hard to control weeds. For example, again, this is a after effect of an herbicide program. We took some pictures. All the weeds are controlled here. The only weed that escaped is Parthenium, meaning always after a pre-emergence or post-emergence program, especially after post-emergence program, just scout in your grove and know what escaped. What are some of the weed escaped? If you see a number of species escaped, highly likely it may not be a tolerance issue. It could be an issue with the not a good application or inadequate application, something wrong with the herbicide mixture and things like that. The pH may be off, there is not enough surfactant or coverage is not good. But if you notice just one species, in this case, like this case, Parthenium, only that weed is escaped after the program and all other weeds are managed, that means something is going on there. There can be a herbicide tolerance developing in that situation. I'm just showing an example of Parthenium, but it could be true for goat weeds or nut sedges and things like that. I'm hearing a lot of issues of escapes from dayflower as well these days. So it's always important to monitor, and early detection of this type of escapes can go a long way in managing or planning a management strategy for addressing these type of weeds. Now, second point is tank mixing and rotating modes of action. This is very important when we want to address aggressive weeds. For example, again, a piece of data. I don't want to throw a lot of data at you, but this actually shows evidence that this rotation is very important. For example, look at this. This is a pigweed control data. We have a weed control efficiency on the y-axis here and years of repeated use, meaning the same herbicide, in this case, was glyphosate, was used over and over. So look at that. So after 2 years, the response of pigweed to this herbicide declined drastically. And after 7 or 8 years, same herbicides used over and over, you are getting less than 50% response here, meaning this is real. If you use the same herbicide over and over, the response of that weed, not only any tolerant weed, a regular weed, I mean, it's gonna reduce a lot, more than 50%. This is same not only for pigweed, other weeds as well as ragweed and horseweed and things like that. So keep in mind, whatever weed pressure you're gonna have, make sure you rotate your herbicide program, because we have herbicides from different modes of action, glyphosate, paraquat, carfentrazone, or glufosinate. They are from different modes of action grouping, and it's always important to rotate them as you go. For example, in the scheme I showed you, the program I showed you earlier, do not use glyphosate again and again. Rather, if you have a glyphosate, next time when you want to do a follow-up, do a carfentrazone or AIM. Next time when you want to do a follow-up, use a glufosinate. So at least do one-time rotation when you use this type of post-emergence herbicides. That's gonna help you, combat this type of tolerance issues. Okay. Similarly for pre-emergence as well, if you have seen my talks before, I'm a big proponent of mixing pre-emergent herbicides, because I believe if you have more than one mode of action in your tank mix, this is a double whammy on your seeds, weed seeds, because sometimes the weeds escape a chemistry, so there is another herbicide in there that can actually battle that. So it's always important. These are some of the examples of successful pre-emergent herbicide mixes we found from our program: Flumi and indaciflam, flumioxazin and diuron, flumioxazine with norfluorosone. This flumioxazine with norfluorosone is a very good mixture, especially when you want to use it in a young grove, because both of these herbicides can be utilized in a young or less than 3 years of age citrus trees. Rimsulfuron and indaciflam is also a new mixture we found can actually work. So with mixing, it's not just only combating the tolerance issue, you can actually has the possibility to reduce the rates as well. So on the cost effectiveness, this may be better as well. So something that I want to bring to the mix, always mix or rotate. That is always important when you want to battle a herbicide tolerance issues. So one thing again we often overlook. So it's a common practice when you apply pre-emergence herbicides, whether it is in a mixture or standalone. It's always a good practice to mix it with a post-emergence partner, for example, glufosinate or glyphosate. So I want to tell you that when you do this, don't use glyphosate over and over. Just even with the mixing with the pre-emergence as a tank mix partner, you rotate it as well. For example, this small study we did, we found that glufosinate can be an excellent tank mix partner or tank mix alternative for glyphosate. For example, we mixed it with indaciflam, which is alliin, flumioxazine, which is SHA2, and diuron. In all the cases, the percentage, look at the percentage weed control, it is same. We got comparable results. So make sure to mix glyphosate or glufosinate as an alternative when you do a tank mix partner with a pre-emergence herbicide, and it actually helps. So we found that when you have a pre-emergence herbicide mixed with a post-emergence, the uptake of the herbicides increases, the effectiveness of the herbicide increases. So don't wait until the weeds are too grown to apply your pre-emergence. You may not get the best out of it. You have to make sure either the ground is clean, or a little bit of weed growth is okay, but you have to make sure you have a post-emergence tank mix partner in your application, okay? And always, in this case also, always rotate. So there is a lot of mixture when I'm talking about herbicide mixing and rotation and tank mixing, things like that. This is a nice tool you might want to take a look. This is an online tool that gives you a proper order of your herbicides, not only herbicide, your surfactants, additives, buffers, and things like that. So you can actually select those products here. For example, herbicides and adjuvants in this case, and you click the get mixing order. It will give you the correct mixing order, which is very important. For example, in most cases, when you're using a buffer or pH adjusting, you may have to add it in the first rather than utilizing it towards the last. So all those things will be provided in this mixing order. Or we have some UF-IFAS EDIS documents that give you information on how to mix, how to do a proper mixing of herbicides and things like that. Okay, so we talked about some hard to control weeds, right? Spanish needles is always on the top, especially in Florida citrus. We are dealing with Spanish needles a lot these days. As I mentioned, Spanish needles are getting tolerant to herbicides. One of the reasons that we found is Spanish needles has this wonderful ability to put out hairs or cuticles on their leaves. Especially, it's a stress mechanism. So when there is drought or when there is high heat, especially in summer months, they put out extra cuticular layers on the leaves. So as a result, the herbicide absorption may not be happening a lot. So that may be one of the reasons we are thinking this weed is getting more and more tolerant to some of the herbicides programs. But what we found that the best way, if you have Spanish needles in your grove, the best way to manage it is to rotate again. So use saflufenacil. Don't use, you may have to do a rotation, maybe a few months, probably after 3 months, wait until 2 to 3 months and apply a 2,4-D and glyphosate mixture. Do not use saflufenacil again. It's not going to work. And you can come back to saflufenacil in the next year on the next season when you have a Spanish needle. So always rotate between saflufenacil and a 2,4-D and glyphosate. Do not apply 2,4-D alone. We found that when you mix glyphosate, especially when you apply this, when you when you have a heavy broad leaf pressure, it's always good to mix 2,4-D and glyphosate. You're going to get the best of both worlds here. Okay, so this is a good management strategy I am suggesting for managing Spanish needles. And for pre-emergence, again, if you can afford a pre-emergent program, definitely utilize the flumioxazine or indaciflam at least once, either as in a standalone or mixture that I shown earlier. That will actually reduce a lot of Spanish needle emergence in your grove. Parthenium, another issue, another challenging weed we are having these days. So again, glufosinate rotated by saflufenacyl and glufosinate, or basically rotate glufosinate with saflufenacyl. That's going to take care of some of the Parthenium weed issues. And if you want to use a pre-emergence, we have some nice products such as pendimethalin, and the mixture of SHA2 and Allium is great on managing some of this Parthenium weed emergence, which can actually reduce the emergence, and you can cut down the rates of post-emergence herbicide application and things like that. This is also a great program for other weeds such as horseweed. The same, glufosinate and saflufenacyl rotation will work on that too. Grasses. This is generally applicable for most of the grasses. Rotate fluacifop glufosinate or fluacifop cethoxidine. Do not utilize this post. Fluacifop is a post. The trade name is post. If you use post and there may be a follow-up application in 3 months, use the post again, it may actually start, the effectiveness may be reduced. So it's always good to rotate it with glufosinate. In my observation, glyphosate alone may not do a great job on managing grasses such as Guinea grass. So it's always good to use glufosinate and then rotate it with fluacifop or post or cethoxidum, or sorry, fluacifop is fusilate, cethoxidum is post, my bad. So always rotate this. And pre-emergence, pendimethalin or prowl is a great grass suppressant in the soil. So it's a great, it's always good to use this pre-emergence herbicide at least once in a production cycle if you have a lot of grass pressure. And flumioxazine and indaciflam mixture is also very effective in controlling grasses. Dayflower, another, especially in the central Florida, we have a lot of issues with dayflower. So although dayflower is a monocot, or it's more related to grasses, when it comes to control or management, it behaves like a broadleaf weed. For example, 2,4-D do a great job on suppressing dayflower. If you will, you can actually rotate it with carfentrazone or AIM, which is a contact herbicide. And for pre-emergence options, there is Solicam or Carmex does a great job on suppressing dayflower, further dayflower emergence in the soil. Finally, sedges, especially nut sedge. The nut sedge always need some kind of systemic herbicide. So glyphosate is very important in nut sedge management. It's a great tool in nut sedge management so that the herbicide will move to the roots or rootlets and kill them. And for rotation, we can utilize glufosinate in this case, and pre-emergence, diuron, or other options I mentioned include flumioxazine and indaciflam mixture. So the message I want to give here, we have herbicides in our toolbox, but the thing is, if you use the same herbicides, whether it is pre or post, you might see a good result in the first application or even in the second application. Then slowly that tolerance will be building up and ultimately resulting in a hard to control or aggressive weed situation in your grove. So either tank mix or rotate. That's the message I want to bring. Now, application timing is very important again when it comes to managing aggressive weeds. For example, most of this, if you again, scouting and monitoring is very important in this case. So look around and see what's coming up after a good cleanup. Look around and see what are some of the weeds you are seeing. For example, this is a very small seedling stage photo of Parthenium. Like we call it like 5-leaf stage. If you count, there are 5 leaves. This is the time actually this is susceptible. These weeds are susceptible to even glyphosate. If you can do a generic glyphosate program, you may be able to tackle them. Same for Spanish needle, 5-leaf stage. You should be able to manage them with a post-emergent program. But when they start maturing, when they start converting from a vegetative growth phase to a reproductive phase, it will be tolerant to glyphosate and other programs. So make sure if you have problem with such as this, make sure hit them when they're really young. Never let them to grow and adapt. And then you'll be looking at an aggressive or hard to control weed situation in your grove. And sedges also, there are several sedges we see in our grove, yellow, purple, then several annual sedges, globe sedge, green killinga. One of the issue with the sedges again is their extensive root system, the tuber formation. So when they start putting up the tubers, it's very difficult for them to manage them. You might see a kill, but they are going to come back from the tubers again, posing a bigger risk. So it's always So I have a tip for you. So from our observation, we found that sedges are very susceptible to herbicide program before they start outputting the tubers. That transition time, the vegetative growth to reproductive phase, that can make these weeds really, really strong and tolerant and to most of the management programs. So if you look at this, there is not yet tubers formed. They're starting to put out the tubers. The white colored adventitious roots are being put out. Finally, later in a few weeks, there will be tubers coming up here. So this is the time you should be consider applying any herbicides into sedges before the tuber formation. So timing is critical with relative to the growth stage of weeds. Make sure you hit the herbicide, you do the post-emergence herbicide program before they start mature and start putting out their flowers or seeds or tubers and things like that. Finally, let me switch gears to one more strategy, a best practice that we are doing a lot of work on recently, cultural practices. So we talked about the chemical control practices, some of the pointers on how to get the best out of them. Now, let's see cultural practices here. So everything starts with a clean row middle. We need to have a row middle vegetation in our grows to keep the soil in place and things like that. So if you do not manage them properly, it would be the number one source for all these problematic weeds into the tree rows. This is the number one source for seed deposition into the tree rows. Okay. So generally, we do a lot of mowing. That's one of our go-to practices for managing row middles. Make sure you mow them at a good reasonable height, and that should be done before the flowering and seeding. But when the grasses, especially, at some point of time, the row middles will be taken out. 8 out of 10 cases will be taken over by the grasses, and you are going to see a sod culture there. So if you start moving, frequent moving is going to cause a lot of regrowth, vigor will increase. So you may start with like a few months moving, and you may end up with doing moving every other week, right? So we have chemical moving also, which I'm not going to talk a lot about that today. But if you apply a sub-lethal, a low dose of glyphosate, you can reduce the frequency of moving and things like that. I have talked about that in my previous talks. But mowing is the go-to method. But make sure whatever you do, mow it before the grasses or the broadleaf weeds in the row middles are going to flowering and seeding, especially grasses. When you start depositing seeds under the row middle, it's going to be a big problem. Another strategy is cover crops. So by collaborating with other researchers, we are looking at how cover crops can be brought into the citrus production system, especially as a sustainable practice. And I am interested in looking at how it can suppress weed growth. There are several advantages for cover crops. You may have heard it from Dr. Sarah Strauss and other researchers about that. But my program is looking at how this can be a great tool for suppressing weed growth. So we did a lot of studies, like multi-year, multi-location studies, and I'm pretty convinced the presence of cover crops can actually reduce the weeds or invasive plants in the row middles. So I'm just want to show a small data. It's negatively correlated. Higher the cover crops per square meter, lesser the number of weeds per square meter. So if you look at here, non-cover cropped area, you see all those nasty weeds that I mentioned. These are all problematic, aggressive, hard to control weeds. Guinea grass, black nightshade is a very high seed setter, gerania, Caroleum geranium, and things like that. But when you have cover crops, in this case, we used the daikon radish, which we found is a fast-growing, easily adapting cover crop for Florida citrus conditions, and you see just the daikon radish here. So that means they can actually stop the growth of other weeds in the row middles. And we also found with cover crops, you have to be patient. Maybe you will not see a lot of outcome in the first planting. So this is small data I want to show you as an evidence. We have cover crop mixture, 2 types of mixture, with legumes and without legumes, but that doesn't matter. When it comes to weed management, the mixture didn't matter. Whatever mixture we used, with legumes or without legumes, it did a great job in both cases. But the one thing I want to bring you is the planting. So we do 2 plantings per year, a spring and a fall. With the planting, with the years, you see better and better weed suppression. You can see that number going down, the number of weeds per square meter going down with more and more planting, meaning the more and more planting of cover crops, the more and more seasons of planting is happening, there is less weeds produced, there is less seeds produced, and the seed bank is getting depleted, which is a good thing. So this can be translated into a sustainable weed management with less chemical involvement and things like that, right? And again, so this can be translated to a weed management in the tree rows also, because although we are doing cover crops in the row meadows, this can help reduce the weed management or weed control in the tree rows as well. With this data, I want to show you weed density. So we have two programs here, cover crop and glufosinate, cover crop and glyphosate. This is applied in the tree rows. So in the control, what we found was the Guinea grass. This is an example data from Guinea grass. You see a lot of Guinea grass in the tree rows, but with cover crop and a glufosinate program under the tree rows, we were able to control the Guinea grass a lot. And Guinea grass is considered as one of the very aggressive weeds. I showed you the roots and everything, right? So this has this ability, this has a tendency to grow very neck and neck near the citrus trees. And their control the spraying can be really difficult. You may have to go for a spot spraying and things like that. But with cover crops in the row meadows, we were able to reduce the pressure in the tree rows as well. So the take home message is, although we are focusing the cover crop planting in the row meadows, it can actually reduce the infestation into the tree rows as well. So this is an data I want to show. So that was some of the strategies I want to talk about when we have a aggressive or hard to control weed situation. What we can do? What are some of the strategies or tools we can bring to the table, and how we can manage it? Now, before wrapping up, let me give you a few slides. Some of the practical approaches that we found in our studies. I want to relate that to you so you can use it in your grow as well. So one thing I often notice is when you have a hard to control weed or tolerant weed, let's say goat weed in this case, always try to use the maximum allowable application rate. I want to show this with a picture here. Apply full rates in this case. This is a goat weed, untreated control. We use paraquat, half of the normal rate and a full rate, or 1/3 of normal rate and full rate. Look at the difference here. So with paraquat 1 pint per acre, it's pretty high amount. Even with that, the goat weed was untouched. It's almost as green as an untreated control, but with the full rate, we were able to fry it up. So this is important as well. So if you have a hard to control weed, whether it is goat weed, especially in the full mature stage, not young stage, but a full mature, a flowering or seeding stage, make sure you apply the full rate, whatever is allowed by the product label. That is important too, right? Use the allowable full rate. And always use the appropriate surfactant. So this is a photo of a cabbage leaf. So cabbage is one of those leaves with a maximum cuticle layer, meaning you cannot retain anything on the cabbage leaf. But this is a picture of a spray with a surfactant. And when we looked at the UV, you can see all the spray droplets are sticking onto the cabbage leaves. So I want to show this picture to enhance or to bring the importance of utilizing a surfactant in the spray mixture. And if the label is suggesting to use a surfactant with the post-emergence program, make sure you use it. Otherwise, it's putting money in the drain. The spray is not going to stay on the leaf. For example, and there are specificities for surfactants as well. For example, tree wicks, I mentioned to you, it's a great broadleaf killer. It will not work with a non-ionic surfactant. You have to use a methylated seed oil with that. So make sure you read the label and see which specific surfactants are actually suggested or recommended to use with that particular product. You are going to see that in the outcome. You get the best of the both worlds here. Grass killers like fusilade or post, always make sure to use a crop oil concentrate. It might work with the non-ionic surfactants, but we found that grass killers need a little bit more penetration, because grasses, when it comes to grasses, their cuticles are very strong, their wax is very strong, they have a lot of hair. So you need something more strong than NIS, just not a surfactant, but a penetrant, which is actually a crop oil concentrate. So always use corn oil concentrate with herbicides such as grass killers. Then pH. This is something, again, we often overlook. If the pH is off in your final spray mix, again, it's putting money in the drain. So I put together a table based on our observation on some of the herbicides and their stability in the pH of the final spray mix. This is the pH of the final spray mix. Some of the herbicides doesn't matter. For example, cethoxidime or post, it's stable in a wide range of pH. But paraquat, gramoxone, after 7, it started unstable. 240 on the other hand is same. After 7, pH 7, it gets unstable. But glyphosate is very sensitive to pH. For instance, after pH 6, the glyphosate can get degrade or disintegrate in the spray mix, and you're not gonna get any outcome, weed management outcome. So if you spray a glyphosate program with a final spray mix pH more than 7, you may not see any kill there. So make sure your pH is there. So always use buffers, or in the case of glyphosate, AMS, there are several buffer or pH adjustant products out there. Make sure to use them, especially when you use a hard water from your farm or grow. It's very important because ideally most herbicides works the best when the final spray mix pH is between 4 and 6. So if it's above that range or beyond that range, you have to make sure that pH is adjusted. Time of the application, very, very important, especially for herbicides like glufosinate. We are using a lot of glufosinate these days. I'm seeing a lot of increase in glufosinate use in our grows, especially when dealing with broadleaf herbicides. And it's a great rotating partner with glyphosate and even an alternative for glyphosate. So glufosinate, always you get the best outcome when you apply it in the midday, especially the sun is out there, because the chemistry of the glufosinate, it doesn't move a lot. It's not a systemic herbicide, it's a contact, but with sunlight it can move a little bit more, and it can actually it can reach the target site very effectively and does a lot of good weed management outcome. For example, we did a study here. See the control, this is a pigweed control, and we sprayed glufosinate at 10 p.m. that is in the night, and 1 p.m. In 10 p.m. no sun, you see some kill there, but most of the pigweed are still green. But at 1 p.m. spray, it smoked everything. Meaning, this is teeny tiny thing. Just if you have a glufosinate program, or if you have a spray mix with glufosinate, make sure it's applied not early in the morning or not in the evening. Make sure it's applied in the midday if other conditions are met. That will give you a good outcome, weed management outcome. Also, cold spray, the weather has a lot. This is all true for post-emergence herbicides. Okay, pre-emergence herbicides, weather only is not that much impacting. Only if you don't have a lot of rainfall, a little bit rainfall is okay. You can apply a pre-emergence herbicide. That's actually good. It's going to activate the herbicide. But when it comes to post-emergent herbicide program planning, you need to think about the weather, the sun, the wind, and things like that. For example, cold weather can always reduce the effectiveness of herbicides. So for example, cutleaf evening primrose, we applied it in cold weather. You can see no kill happening here. So most of the post-emergence herbicides works best when the air temperatures between 65 degree and 85 degree. If it's beyond this range, you may not get a good outcome, especially, and also the hot weather. We are going to see a lot of hot summer down the road. So if you have planned a glyphosate 240 or cethoxidime, one of the herbicide application, make sure the temperature is less than 95, because at more than 95 degree Fahrenheit, you're going to see a lot of stressed weeds. Once the weeds are stressed, you may not see a lot of kill. For example, this is Spanish needle stand. We applied it when the temperature is about 95, 96 degree. You see a little bit of kill, not much. The grasses are killed. The grasses may not have a lot of impact. In this case, if you have a good, correct chemistry applied to grasses, you can kill it. But when it comes to broadleaf weeds, the weather has a big impact. For example, here, the Spanish needle was untouched when we applied it before, at 95 plus degree Fahrenheit. So because the weeds were stressed, it was not uptake and things like that. So heat stressed Spanish needles are less sensitive to herbicide application. Similarly, rain, we are going to see a lot of rain as well. So this is a table I put together with examples of rain fast period that we need to provide when we use a post-emergence herbicides. So applying just between 2 rains is not going to work. Again, putting money in the drain. We need to give enough rain fast or dry period to make sure these post-emergence sprays are retaining and drying, so that that can be absorbed and translocated and get that weed killed. For example, most of the herbicides like less than 6 hours is required. 1 to 6 hours is required, but for 2,4-D, especially embed extra, you may have to give more than 6 hours. I would say 12 to 24 hours is rain-free period is required when you plan a 2,4-D based herbicide application. Other herbicides, a half day is enough. But again, also make sure you don't have a rain coming in the next day as well. So a couple of days, a rain-free period is always good, and you can get the best out of your herbicide program when you apply it in a rainy period. And pre-emergence. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of pre-emergence herbicides in our citrus weed management program. I know budgets are getting tight. I know there are more priorities, but if you can afford, at least use one pre-emergence program in the production season, and that can run a long way. For example, a picture of a very clean tree row. The same picture as the same spot, again, I photographed in 30 days. See, all sort of weeds are there. So the study shows that a square foot of soil 6 inches deep can have about 3,000 viable weed seeds. This can be translated to more than 130 million viable seeds per acre. Our seed soil is an enriched seed bank which can get a lot of seeds every year, right? So it's a time, if they get enough sunlight, moisture, and all the nutrients, they can germinate from the blue. And another data I want to show you is the seed viability. Some of these seeds can stay in the soil for a very long years. For example, see, horseweed can up to stay in the soil for 10 years. Pigweed about 6 years. Parthenium 6 years. All these seeds can stay in that soil for a very, very long year, viable. So given time, given the right opportune, have a good of rainfall, it's going to come out of the soil. So make sure you have that pre-emergence herbicides in a program included in your management. So, and when you look at these weeds that I showed you earlier, this has all those weeds that I mentioned, the problematic weeds: horseweed, parthenium, Spanish needle, Carolia geranium, nutset, Guinea grass. So don't skip pre-emergent herbicides. That's a very important message I want to bring to the table here. So that's about it. So we talked about why some weeds are hard to control. Why are they aggressive? There is several factors, including herbicide tolerance, deep or extensive root system that can make a weed really aggressive, high reproductive capacity. We talked about some of the number of the seeds produced by your weed, how long they can be viable in the soil, how much they can be adaptive to all this challenging situation. And we talked about some of the examples of hard to control weeds, and then the post and pre-emergent programs. We looked at it. Monitoring is very important. Early detection is the key. Look for escapes and things like that. Always tank mix, always rotate when you plan a herbicide program. Application timing, early, mid relative to growth stage of the weed is important. Another strategy such as cultural practices, cover crops can also help in a sustainable management of weeds. We talked about some practical approaches. Don't skimp on the rates. Use high rates when you have a mature growth stage weed. Use surfactants and adjuvants. Don't apply during bad weather. Always think about the weather, whether it's going to be rainy, sunny, and things like that when you plan, especially when you plan a post-emergence herbicides. And don't skip pre-emergence herbicides. At least one pre-emergence herbicides can help you fight those weeds, address these challenges in the long run. That's all. I want to thank the collaborators, growers. Many of the data we collected are from the actual growers, actual grows. So thanks for that. And this is my team. They did a lot of work, hard work. I'm just here to present. So I want to extend my gratitude to them, my postdoc students and other technicians, funding agencies, and thank you. That's all I have for today. I hope you got some information from this talk, and we have some quick reference guides available online. This is the link for that, and we have a link for post-emergence herbicides and a quick guide for pre-emergence herbicides. You can print it out, put it in your truck, and it has all the rates and restrictions and other things that I talked about today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kanissery. Any questions?
I'll be happy to take any questions, or you can also email me any questions if you have. I'll be happy to answer them. Any weed identification, you can coordinate with Monji. and we can help identify that for you. If you have a specific question on a specific management program, I'll be happy to answer that for you. So let's kill some weeds.